Good afternoon to our live YouTube audience. It is the Illini Inquirer Podcast. We are live on our YouTube page. I want to get back into doing these a little bit more because I think we're going to be home for a little bit more here recently with the football schedule. Just one game left in the basketball season upon us. But it is Jeremy Werner. It is Joey Wagner. Welcome in, everybody. We got a lot to talk about on this one as Illinois is going bowling and they're going portaling. And Illinois accepts the bid to the Citrus Bowl. They will play South Carolina. We'll talk about that matchup. We'll try to get on a South Carolina expert a little bit on later on because I know people want to know about opt-outs and all that stuff, and that still is accruing even at Illinois. So we'll give that some time before we preview that matchup. But the transfer portal also opened up today on December 9th, Monday. We'll talk about the entries so far, 6 for Illinois. We would expect more. We'll break those down. But then we'll get into Illinois and what they will add in the portal. We have a fun exercise to kind of break that down. But Joey Wagner, good morning. How are you, buddy?
Good morning. It's like halfway football, halfway basketball season right now, or maybe some people obviously all the way in on Illinois basketball. But crossover season's over, and now it's like, I guess maybe not over entirely because you still have roster building crossover season. Never stops, Jeremy. It's fun.
No, it never does stop. And Illinois accepts the bid to the Citrus Bowl. That is not surprising. We have talked on this podcast for the past 3-4 weeks. Like, this is a real possibility, and it looks like it's all lining up, especially after Illinois beat both Michigan State and Rutgers. So they get the Citrus Bowl. But the opponent, a little bit of a surprise, given that Bama slipped out of the college football playoff. I have some thoughts about that, but I don't think Bama has a great argument of being like, yes, they definitely deserved it. I just didn't think SMU had a great resume as it was, but SMU gets in. I think a lot of people are happy that it's someone other than Bama, but I thought Ole Miss would have been the great storylines of Lane Kiffin, Luke Altmaier, Zachary Franklin, and then just Lane and Brett at the same press conference and in the same game would have been good. But Illinois gets South Carolina, Joey, and I know some Illini fans, maybe this isn't the most exciting matchup because South Carolina's not as big of a brand as Bama or Ole Miss, especially with Lane at Ole Miss. But the Gamecocks are one of the hottest teams in the country. 6 straight wins. They have several NFL draft prospects, but they have 2 really good freshmen as well, and quarterback Lenora Sellers and the edge player Dylan Stewart, who might be a top 5 pick eventually. But what did you make of Illinois drawing South Carolina and the Citrus Bowl, picking South Carolina over these other teams?
Yeah, I mean, if you're an Illinois fan, you probably were hoping for a team that maybe would be less eager to be there and maybe full of opt-outs, but I don't know. I mean, once SMU was in, didn't you kind of think, like, okay, it'll be Alabama? Because if you kind of go by the order, it feels like they were the next SEC team when they were first.
I'll give you a shout. I'll give you a shout. You were texting me as SMU was getting blown out kind of at the start of that game, and kudos to them for coming back. I was like, I don't think they're getting in. I think Bama will jump them, even if it's a conference championship game, and they didn't. So everyone was like, we want Bama. Illinois fans actually wanted Bama because why wouldn't you? There's nothing to lose. But yeah, it was a little shocking how it all came about.
Yeah, it was a little surprising. I'm with you. I wanted the Lane storyline. Altmaier obviously would have gotten a lot. Here's the thing, though. I don't know how much Luke would have shared. You know what I mean? Like, he's very open and vulnerable, but he hasn't really seemed interested in going back to that, and he's certainly not going to crap on the team he's about to play. So, like, that would have been a fun storyline to talk. I don't know that you would have gotten a lot of meat or substance out of him or Lane or anything that would have made that really feel like a bigger story. But it would have been electric for Lane Kiffin and Brett Bielema joint pressers going into that thing. South Carolina's tough, man, and like they're a team that's gonna. We don't know. Go ahead.
Are they the scariest opponent here? Because Alabama would have had a ton of opt-outs, and I don't think Alabama would have wanted to be there, right? And then Ole Miss, that's one of the most talented rosters in the country, but because of that, I think they would have had like 10 or 12 opt-outs. So, like, as you talked about, like, we'll have to see with South Carolina. Kyle Kennard, their edge rusher, is really, really good. They got a safety that ESPN has as a top 20 prospect in this draft. So certainly they'll have some guys leave, as Illinois does with Pat Bryant so far. But this is like a young and up-and-coming team. It feels like under Shane Beamer, especially with their quarterback and their defensive front, which is just fierce.
Yeah, so like it's two. If you're not really a fan of either and you're just trying to find something to do at 3 o'clock or whatever time that is, New Year's Eve, you might be like, it's a game where you're not going to have the opt-out, you wouldn't think, storyline really dominating like you've seen in the past. Brett Bielema said he just expects Pat Bryant. That's kind of one of those. Let me see what's in who makes the trip to Orlando, and this is the way things go these days. And we'll see what South Carolina does. I think it's going to be a bowl game of two teams that are as whole can be in December. But if you're Illinois, if you're a fan of Illinois, you probably would have just preferred to go take a team that was down to its, second stringers, third stringers, whatever the case may be. And hopefully you can maybe find an easier path to that 10 games. So it should be fun. And that's good. Like some of these bowls, you just get there and it's just kind of like, blah, right? Because, it's not the team that you've gotten used to watching on either side for the better part of the season. I think this might avoid that, but again, not to keep going to the caveat. We won't know that until we know that. We'll see how this goes.
Yeah, Illinois opens as an 11.5 point underdog per DraftKings and BetMGM. This is the number 14 team in the AP, number 21 team in the AP. So obviously they see a big difference between these two teams in terms of talent here. But I do think this is a bowl game that actually means a lot to both these teams. South Carolina disappointed they didn't get in, but let's be honest, they're just riding this wave of like, hey, we got a chance. Like if Illinois would have beaten Minnesota, it would have felt like both these programs just like, hey, just being on the doorstep and having an argument to get in is big for this program, because Shane Beamer came into this year, felt like a big year for him, and to go 9-3, 5-3 in the SEC, and to have a star quarterback now in Lenore Sellers, dual threat, going to be one of the guys that's getting a lot of hype in this bowl season, but also going into next season. Dylan Stewart, again, looks like Jadeveon Clowney, basically, when he was coming up, and could be like a guy that's in a top 3 pick whenever he's eligible in a couple years. But I think this means a lot for South Carolina to try to get to 10 wins. But for Illinois, Joey, there's an opportunity to shock people and win as an underdog, but to get to 10 wins, which has happened only 4 times in program history. I mean, this is only the 8th time they've won 9 games. So I thought Josh Whitman hit it on the head that this is one of those seasons. Like, even if you don't get into a college football playoff, even if you're not in the Rose Bowl, to be in the Citrus Bowl, to have a chance at 10 wins, it's a great way to cap the season with this opportunity to do it in Orlando and Florida for one of the premier bowl games outside of the college football playoff. For a program like Illinois, and to be honest, for a program like South Carolina, I think this is a great opportunity for both these programs, but certainly for Illinois. And I know you wrote a great story on that. People can check that out at IlliniInquirer.com. But Whitman didn't hide from that. I think Bielema, given all the stuff he's going through with transfer portal, with preparing his team and practice and all these things, he's kind of in the middle of it. But even he, I think, knows how big of a deal this is.
Yeah, look, I mean, right now with an expanded playoff, you can wonder how big any non-CFP bowl games truly are. But if you're going to go to one, you want to go to one of the top 1 or 2, best bowl games that you can get. And Illinois has done that. And we get so lost in every drive, every play on those drives within the course of a game. And there's frustration of, you only rushed 3. What are you doing? Oh my gosh, you ran on 3rd and 6. What are you doing? And all of that's what makes this go from August, I guess, to now. And it's fair, it's part of it, but you do have to zoom out sometimes and realize, like, this team's got 9 wins. At Illinois, where I asked Josh Whitman yesterday, I said, you've been here when bowl games weren't the standard. And it was such an outlier to get red hot in 2019 and find your way. I say red hot, just hot enough would probably be a better way to put it. In 2019 to go to San Francisco. And you don't want to minimize that. You don't want to lose sight of what that meant in that moment. But if you zoom out at 9 wins and the chance to get 10, that's a pretty big deal around Illinois. And if you're Brett Bielema, I thought he touched on it perfectly yesterday. That's ammo to go to the transfer portal with, both in terms of what your donors and what your fans are feeling and how much they would like to part ways with their money for NIL. And he said, maybe guys who turned us down before because we weren't winning enough. And he said, hey, I understand that. Like, I get that. Now you can say, look, we got 2 Florida bowl games in 2 years. You're not in, and no slight to Detroit or the Pinstripe Bowl or whatever, but you're in some marquee bowl games here against top teams and top 25 teams in the country. That resonates with kids looking for both a chance at playing time, a chance at exposure, a chance at money. You're equipped well to go in there and do that. Now, they've got to do that. We'll talk about what that could look like here in a minute, but that's kind of the trickle down of what this is. And if you're fans, you could go to Florida for a week, right? And go eat Cheez-Its like you and I will be doing. I don't know if you eat Cheez-Its, but I would take a Cheez-Its like mayo bath.
I
You
don't
know what
mind.
I mean?
Yeah.
Maybe that's just have people dump Cheez-Its on me, like whoever's in the mayo bowl.
If Illinois wins, I was looking at pictures on Getty the other day. You're looking for stuff, and I forgot what player it was doing like snow angels and Cheez-Its. I'm just imagining.
Oh, what a dream!
Just imagining like Josh Krutz doing snow angels and Cheez-Its.
Yeah, Josh Krutz is an A1 pick to go do that. I would happily join them for that. That sounds incredible. A little party mix out there. Yeah. Who's your ideal snow angel? Josh Krutz, just for the irony of it.
Yes. Yeah. That would be so perfect. Most likely, I mean, Pat Bryant would have been.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe if he's there, he still does it. Matthew Bailey?
Matthew Bailey was pretty high up there on my list. Who's got a ton of personality who I think would do it is Torrey Cox.
Potentially. With his like grill in. Yeah.
Offensively, well, we already derailed this thing, haven't we?
Malik Elsie?
Malik Elsie comes to mind. Like, I don't see Josh. Josh McCray is my wild card. Josh McCray, he's got like the DeMonte, doesn't say a lot to us, but I know there's a lot of personality there. He's my wild card.
How about Luke? I bet Luke would do it.
With the mullet?
Yeah.
Oh, that'd be good with the mullet.
That would be really good. All right. I do want to hit on this. Illinois, they've never beaten an SEC opponent. 0-6 against SEC opponents. So this is the opportunity to do that. But I think you hit on why it's so important, Joey, is because you think of the bowl appearances before this. 2019, I mean, you had to get on a heater to get there. And I know you were 6-4, right? You won 4 straight games to get to that. And then you lost the final 2 games. But there was some luck involved there. 2014, I don't know how that team got there, but they won their last 2 games against Penn State, Northwestern, and they get to a bowl game. It's like, oh, look, they're in a bowl game when you didn't think they were going to have a chance at it. 2010 and 2011, you got to bowls and you won both of them, which was great for Ron Zook. But you also lost 6 games to end the 2011 regular season. In 2010, yes, you got back to a bowl game, but you had some disappointing losses, and it just still felt like those 2 teams, as you look back with all the talent they had, underachieved. And that came after an inexplicable 5-7 and 3-9 season in 2008 and 2009. This feels like you're building. Like you're truly building something because you won 8 games 2 years ago, right? You've turned over the roster a lot, and now you're back there with 9-win season, and you just missed out on a bowl game the year before. So all of this is to lead to sustained success. And that's why, winning a 10th game would be huge. And I think the bowl is meaningful for this program, but just to play on ABC on New Year's Eve at the 2:00 Central Time, 3 Eastern time slot is big for this program. Just to have that opportunity, have people talking about you for a day as they're thinking about the college football playoff. I'm like, oh, that game's on. Let's watch. I think it's huge because it talks about sustained success. And that's what this whole thing is about. In 2 bowl games in 3 years, an 8-win season, a 9-win season. I think that gives you reason to believe that this thing is turning. And just to go back on thinking about this year and the wins that they have had, a ranked win over Kansas in primetime, a ranked win over Nebraska in primetime on the road, that Michigan win, ridiculous. And the way you found a way to win Purdue, you eke that one out, but the Rutgers game, just an amazing comeback with iconic moments in that. And Northwestern, Aiden Lawfrey with his big day. So it was just a great season for Illinois football and the best I've covered. 2022 was great, but 2023 was even better, and it felt like there were even bigger moments.
Yeah, there were, and I'm with you. I think to me, what really sticks out is the difference between 2024 and that 2022 season is you kept pushing in November. Yeah, and you weren't kind of sliding into a bowl game in a lot of ways like they were in 2022. And I think that's just a perception of it. We're saying red hot South Carolina. Hey, Illinois could put together a conversation too for being pretty hot going in to this bowl game. And I'm with you. Maybe you're flipping around kind of pre-gaming for your night or college football playoff. Illinois is a fun team to watch play football. This isn't just like
style of play, right?
Right. I mean, perfect style? No, right? And fans who have been a part of this thing for the last 12 games, maybe as their hearts are beating fast in the fourth quarter, would push back on what our idea of fun is in a lot of ways. But this is a team that, like, you're going to see Luke Altmaier, and he's got a little personality. You'll see him out there slinging the football. Obviously, Pat Bryant's a fun guy to watch, but Zachary Franklin, who's going to be the other receiver to step up in that moment. They can run the ball. They've got personality. I think people will at least be entertained by that, unless the score gets one way or the other goes pretty haywire. I think it's a fun team to watch, and that's what you want if you're the Citrus Bowl. For not just Illinois and South Carolina fans, you want people to watch this thing on TV. You want maybe a random Orlando resident to snag a ticket and go watch a bowl game, like you and I have talked about doing for the Pop-Tart Bowl, going into that. So, like, that Illinois makes sense for them beyond the 9 wins in the regular season. They know Illinois is going to travel like crazy down to Florida, and they're going to be a fun product to put on the field. And that's what this is. If you're not in that college football playoff, it's all about, okay, what gets the most attention? What's fun? What's going to be a competitive game? I think you check a lot of boxes with these two.
And I think what the network's like and what these bowl games probably like Illinois was slated to be here. Like there really wasn't another choice, but I mean, Brett Bielema is a sell for them. Like, people like him. Like, he kind of sells this thing, and he can ramble a bit sometimes at these press conferences, but like he's fun. Like he's fun in front of those, and he's a good salesman.
If you, like, for us, we say he rambles because a little bit at times. He gets back to usually the answer. But that's because we kind of consume it differently. And when you sat through these pressers, you've heard, a lot of the similar stories from Brett, which is fine. He's a good storyteller. But if you're just coming in fresh for Brett Bielema presser, you're going to be pretty entertained, right? And he's going to get you with a story, and he's going to crack a joke about this. Like, that is good for the bowl game reps and kind of for how people consume going into bowl season.
And the other thing we should mention, like, for Illinois, Brett mentioned this. I haven't fact-checked it, but I think Brett Moore, who does a great job as an SID, researched the stat, like the most Florida players on the Big Ten roster, like 17. And a lot of these guys are impactful players on this team. I think that's good to be able to be down there, to be in the Orlando media, maybe a little bit, right? Like, there's going to be Orlando media that are there and Florida media that are there that cover this thing. And that's not a bad thing. Maybe some of these recruits actually come in and watch the game because it's an easy trip over there. So that's another element of this.
I was thinking about that going into it. I'm like, are we going to have to, like, find some recruits in the stands or find some recruits? There was a recruit watching the ReliaQuest Bowl practice. Do you remember that? We got there and we kind of looked. I don't remember who it was. Was it Toby?
I think it was. I was going to say it was one of the DBs.
He was definitely a DB, but the point being, not to derail this, like, it's good for the recruits to go see their next team, and we'll try to catch up with them and hear what they have to say. But when you're trying to make Florida kind of a second or third, depending on how, it's definitely a second home for Illinois, you want to say, hey, we're going to have the door open for you to come back down and play, hopefully multiple times in front of your fans back home. So I think that matters. And obviously, in terms of more people in the seats, when you have extended family able to show up and watch your kids play football.
Yeah, we asked Brett Bielema yesterday if he's expecting any other opt-outs, and he said Pat Bryant's the only one he knows so far. It's very early in this process, right? But to be honest with you, you look on paper, I think Pat Bryant's the only one that might be able to afford it. The only other two that I think could is Gabe Akis and Xavier Scott. And those guys are true juniors. And Joey, you and I were going back and forth you brought up the great point. Who is the last Illini junior to go in the draft? And we mean true junior. Like, they've had some redshirt guys, some COVID guys that were technically juniors. But the last third-year player to be drafted in the NFL for Illinois was Corey Leggett and Mikel LaShore in the 2011 draft. So if Gabe or Xavier Scott go there, they could be the first in a long time for Illinois, which I think would be a great thing for Brett Bielema if those guys were drafted high enough, because he recruited them, right? He recruited them. He developed them. But those guys got some decisions to make. What I've heard is Gabe's probably a mid-round draft pick. Could he be a third-round draft pick? That'd be enticing. But Johnny Newton was kind of that and came back. Xavier Scott, I don't think he's quite the prospect of a Quan Martin, who's just athletically better, but he's a first-team All-Big Ten player. And from what I've heard, NFL teams really value Illinois defensive backs, given what they've done and how they've developed those guys. So those would be my two biggest. Otherwise, I don't see really anybody on this roster. Like, I think Zachary Franklin can gain something from being the number one receiver in this bowl game for Illinois. I think, you look at the offensive lineman, J.C. Davis. Go against Dylan Stewart and play pretty well. I think he can help himself. So we'll see with those guys. I can never knock anybody. I'm not going to knock anybody. I get why fans don't like it, but Bryant's the only one that right now makes sense for me, unless Gabe gets, great feedback back from the NFL. And Bielema said he submitted 5 non-seniors. Gabe and Xavier were 2 of those. We could speculate who the other 3 are, but Gabe would maybe be the only one I think that really could afford to sit out if he gets a great grade.
Yeah, and that's really dependent on how the NFL views him. I think it's interesting. I'm with you. I think all those things, and for the reasons you said, why it would make sense for Zachary Franklin, for a Dennis Briggs, for J.C. Davis to play. The Gabe thing is interesting because, in one breath you can say, well, hey, Johnny Newton came back and made himself a 2nd-round draft pick, and that's probably should have been a 1st round. If we're just being honest, he was projected to be a 1st-round draft pick. And that's if you're Illinois, you should pitch the hell out of that and say, hey, climb up another round or 2 or however they value you.
And you and I know Gabe watched Johnny closely.
Absolutely.
Like after last season, he goes, I want that. Like, it is clear that what he saw in Johnny helped him take another step as a player. But go on.
Devil's advocate, though, he also watched Keith Randolph come back, have an ankle injury that really limited his overall production. I don't want to make it sound like, you and I, Keith was a for sure draft pick. There's a lot more that goes into it than just his ankle, but he was projected to be a draft pick. And we can say that, I think, pretty comfortably. He ends up going into UDFA with the Bears. But like, that's the other side of the risk we talk about with this, with coming back and not saying, hey, I'm going to go get that first contract in the 3rd or the 4th round, and then, hit big next time around when my next contract comes up. So it's,
and you hit free agency sooner, right?
Yeah. So I do think, like, if I were trying to make that decision, and I'm talking about doing snow angels and freaking cheeses, so I'm not the one in those shoes, like, you do have to kind of look at that too, because you have 2 examples sitting right there as to how far you can climb, but also what a possible injury could do for you moving forward. So he's a really interesting case study, Jeremy. He is the most interesting decision on this team because I think he's got the hardest decision.
Do we throw Seth Coleman into that, like with Keith? I mean, Seth came back, and I think
Keith was probably more like, I envisioned Keith more of a draft pick than I thought maybe Seth Coleman was coming back into his 6th year because consistency.
Yeah, I just wonder if Seth's stock was better last year because he was a little bit more dominant late in the season with those 6 sacks in 6 games, and now he's got an injury that he's got to deal with and going off. So it is the other side of that, right? I think Xavier Scott can really help himself. Gabe Akis can help himself, but there's also a downside of it. So we'll see that. We've speculated this. Who are the other 3 names you think they submitted to the NFL? I think Tanner Arkin is definitely one of them.
Man, Brett Bielema is over the moon about that guy. And again, maybe we haven't had enough discussion over the course of the season about Tanner Arkin, but he said yesterday Tanner Arkin might be the most serviceable tight end he's had in his career. Dude's had some tight ends. Like, that's not a nothing comment. So he would make sense for that. I wondered if Matthew Bailey or Miles Scott was in that conversation.
Yeah, Matthew Bailey, a redshirt sophomore. I think Luke. I would have thrown
Luke would have to have been the other one.
Yeah, I would have thrown him out there, and I think Melvin Priestley too. He had a really good year, broke through. I think he's got the athleticism, size that the NFL wants. Probably in a guard though, right? Like, but I can see them throwing him out there. Just be like, hey, Melvin, this is what you are now. You come back, you can take an Isaiah Adams leap or something like that.
Well, and I think to do that, like, obviously, like, getting that open line of communication is helpful, but you also want to show those guys what's in front of them, right? And like, if you're submitting, if they're one of those 5, you sure as heck believe in them to put them out there and give them that window. So this isn't as much about, like, he says he submitted 5. I don't hear that as like he thinks there are 5 guys with draft decisions. So I don't think that's how I'm viewing this. I think it's just 5 guys. You're kind of putting that out there, like, yo, this is what they think of you right now. Here's how we can help them. They think you're not good at X. Well, this is how we'll make you better at X, and kind of push that forward going into the next season.
All right, Joe, let's talk about the transfer portal. Window open today, Monday, December 9th. It closes on the 28th. That's the last day you can enter your name, but you can sign with the program after that. They'll host official visits in early January as well. The first day of class is is January 21st. So that's really the date that you need those guys basically here by. So I just want to mention that the dates, like, yes, the portal closes at the 28th, but you're still going to have movement after then and commitments and visits and all of that. But so far, Illinois has had 6 players enter the transfer portal: defensive lineman Anichi Sledge, offensive lineman Hunter Whitenack, offensive lineman Kevin Wigginton, defensive back Chase Canada, quarterback Cal Swanson, and punter Declan Dooley. No huge surprises here, Joey. You do lose at one point early in the season, potentially 2 guys from your O-line 2 deep. Hunter Whitenack played in the first couple games, but he obviously was redshirting and, hit the portal. There was talk that last spring he could have entered the portal. Kevin Wigginton only lasts 1 year, thought he was a big addition, didn't make a big impact. Sledge only played, 15, 20 snaps. Chase Canada only played 20 snaps. Cal Swanson buried on the depth chart. Most people outside the program probably thought Declan Dooley, given, El Paso Gridley kid, scholarship punter, the fact that he transferred, but Hugh Robertson and Fabrizio Pinton were ahead of him, and he probably just wants to go play somewhere with Pinton probably coming back, and we'll see if Hugh Robertson decides to come back for another year as well.
Yeah, there had to be a trickle effect from Pinton taking that job, and frankly, probably one of the more surprising developments in terms of roster spots over I guess into 2 deep over the course of this season. So there's going to be a fallout from that, right? And if you're Declan Dooley, you see this guy that we don't know how exactly the depth chart looked, let's say back in October or whatever the case was, but to see this guy take a step and, all of a sudden he's jumped you and he's jumped Hugh Robertson, or he's presumably jumped you got to find a spot. Like, there's a finite window for these kids. And all these guys that we've talked about who have entered the portal to this point, they've got to be considering the window in terms of maximizing themselves and their opportunities. And we know Declan Dooley has a huge left leg, but we've said this before, and we said it when Pinton took the job. We do see, for as much as we complain, we do see a lot of special teams doing open portions of practice, and Dooley, for as big of a leg as he had, there were some consistency things that we saw in our limited viewing, and he said the same thing about Pinton and he snagged that job.
Yeah, none of these are surprising, right? Like, Whitenack, once he obviously was redshirting, that seemed clear. Can't blame him. He preserves a year of eligibility. He's got 2 years to play. Brandon Henderson seemed to beat him out, and with Brandon Henderson being a guard moving forward, it seems like that's going to be tough. Kevin Wigginton just never really rose on the depth chart as we expected he would. Like, I thought he would compete for a starting job, and that just never happened. So he's got 1 year of eligibility left, and he'll go somewhere else. Sledge was the 4th nose tackle. Chase Canada was the 3rd or 4th nickel. And Cal Swanson was the 5th or 6th quarterback on this team. So none of these are surprises. Like, and that's what you want going in is not a lot of surprises from the 2 deep. And it's one thing that Brett Bielema has been very, very good at is roster retention. Because you think of the guys who have left, even some of the surprises like Zachary Toby or Trey Smith last year, those guys haven't made a huge impact. Like Reggie Love has made a big impact, made a decent impact at Purdue this past year. Likely would have played for Illinois, but obviously running back wasn't a huge issue, even losing Caden Fagan. So if you can keep that up, and Brett Bielema always uses the qualifier, I don't know what's ahead. But so you can always be surprised. There's probably going to be a surprise at some point. But so far, none of this is surprising. And this is the kind of roster attrition that probably is a benefit, because maybe now you can go find upgrades.
Yeah, you're going to go portaling, right? You're going to go try to find – we'll get into the exercise that you drew up for us to think about how they're going to attack the portal here in a minute. But you need roster spots, not scholarships anymore, Jeremy, roster spots to go do that. So it's – and for those guys, again, go find your spot where you can get in. You're guaranteed a spot in the 2 deep, or you're pushing for a start. Like, that makes sense for those guys to have those opportunities. But to your point about retention, we've known that at least early on in Brett's tenure. That's where the NIL, and I would assume it's still very heavily focused in retention, because that's the biggest part. As fun as portal additions are, and as fun as the impact that you've seen as Zachary Franklin, or J.C. Davis, Melvin Priestley, Dennis Briggs, go on down the line, Torrey Cox, you've seen those make. Those really carry a lot of weight if you don't retain Luke Altmaier last year, or if you don't retain
Gabe Akis.
You go on down the line. Right. Like those things.
Pat Bryant. I mean, his dad.
Yeah, that's right.
Pat thought about Portland 2 years ago, and I got to be honest, a year ago at this time, there were some nerves, like because Pat was a good player, and there's a lot of SEC programs from his backyard that probably could have been really interested in him. So, like, I get that stuff's not sexy to people, but I've been trying to hammer that. Yes, you want to keep adding, and we'll talk about that here in a second of your war chest. But to keep your own players is so significant. And you look at this roster, Joey, you have some big pieces you're going to have to replace with Pat Bryant, Dennis Briggs, and T-Raw Edwards and Zachary Franklin. But you also have the potential to return 15 starters and some other guys with starting experience that were 2 deep rotation players. You can return a lot of your back 7. You can return most of your offensive line. You can return your running back, and you can return your quarterback. Like, that is a huge part of this offseason, is making sure your players stay. And I think, one, Illinois has prioritized them with the money that they have available. And 2, they seem to like it here. And they seem to like how they're getting developed, how they're being used. Now, some guys are going to not play big roles and they leave, and that's going to happen. But if they can continue that, I like where this program's going.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's not sexy to say so-and-so's coming back, or, you're not talking about someone not leaving, but it's really meaningful when those guys come back. And I think Brett Bielema really hit kind of the ultimate point for this whole offseason yesterday when he was talking about his conversations with Luke Altmaier and about the future with Luke and what that looks like. And Luke hitting him up with X player, Y player who's in the portal. And, hey, it's going to be fun, right? If you're Luke Altmaier, you're dreaming of some of these wide receivers I would assume, to replace Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin. But he's a sell too.
Yeah.
He is a sell for offensive skill players to come back and have a quarterback who is good, who's going to get you the ball, who's going to allow you to be the best version of yourself while you help him stay and elevate the best version of himself. And no, man, wide receivers, really good wide receivers don't really care to go to the 2016 through 19 Illinois football quarterback room.
Iowa.
Right. Like, that matters to have Luke Altmaier back. And that to me is the underlying thing, because I think when we think about the portal, and we're going to get into this, my brain right now is very portal offensive heavy, because you are losing Pat Bryant, you are losing Zachary Franklin, you are losing JC Davis. That's not to minimize the really, to me, 2 positions on defense you really got to hit probably pretty hard here in the coming months. But my brain is offensively, because I think you can take this offense, continue to push it to another level, and you got a quarterback who's going to want guys to come in and do that.
Yeah, you asked Brett a question about, what this means for the program to get in this bowl game. And then all of a sudden he kind of went into the roster, and he went into what we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. And I thought 2 of the most interesting names he brought up was, one, Luke Altmaier and the conversations he's had with Luke. They've had their sit down. And the fact that Luke is talking about what portal entries they want to bring in, I think that's really encouraging. And it is a concern when you have this good of a quarterback. He's got a big market, right? And there are SEC programs that would probably love to have Luke Altmaier, so that's going to up his price. But I think Illinois is going to pay him what he should be paid, and I just think Luke really likes it here. I mean, he's said that, and Barry Lundy Jr., who, whether it's this year, next year, or whatever, he's probably going to be a head coaching candidate. And I think Barry wants to be a head coach. So I think eventually, like, that would be a concern if Barry left this offseason. But until that happens, I think him and Barry have a great relationship.
They're so good for each other. They are so good for each other.
It's been an awesome marriage for Luke in Illinois. And a 3rd year for Luke. Brett's saying he's excited about his future. I think that's encouraging. And I think Illinois sell is, hey, we know we lose some pieces that really helped you this year. JC Davis, Zachary Franklin, Pat Bryant, but we are building around you. You are the face of our franchise. And the fact that Brett is talking about Luke as a Heisman candidate, you need to do a lot of things to be a Heisman candidate.
Yeah, but you got a head coach who's going to knock on every single door between now and August to put this quarterback in all the light possible. We know that about Brett. He's going to market the hell out of Luke Altmaier for 8 months.
Yeah, and like with this offense, with what they're doing, with what Luke did this past year, like, it's not ridiculous to say, but it's just him saying how much he values him, right? And how valuable he is to this program. And Brett saying, you got to have a quarterback. If you don't have a quarterback, it's not going to work. I think that's all saying, yes, we're going to invest in Luke Altmaier. We're going to bring this guy back. And we're going to build around him. And just talking with people in the program, they think they're going to be really good next year. And a lot of it has to do with the returners they have, but most importantly, the quarterback that they have. Because if Luke returns for another year, has even just the same season as he had this year, Joey, he's one of the best quarterbacks of all time at Illinois. And you're going to go bowling again. It's just to determine of how good it is. So I thought that was good. And the other guy that might have gone under the radar, he brought up Alec Bryant, which he was one of the guys who we raised our eyebrows when he went through senior day. You know, obviously Kevin Wigginton was one of those, but not a big surprise. Hugh Robertson, even though he's 33 years old or whatever he is, like it's like, oh, is he going to come back? But Alec Bryant is a fifth-year guy, graduated from Illinois. They usually just want to get those guys through graduation. Keith and Johnny went through it the year before, right? I believe Keith
went through it like 3 times. Ryan Mead's gone through it like 3 times.
But the fact that he said Alec Bryant, like there's more to him. Like I was like, okay, maybe you can pencil Alec Bryant is the starter to replace Seth Coleman, that he would be back next year. And I don't know why he wouldn't come back to Illinois next year, given that Seth Coleman leaves and given that he can be a starter and have his best season. But to have that piece locked in, given that Gabe is going to kind of test and see what his NFL draft stock is, I don't think that's insignificant that he mentioned Alec Bryant is one of the pieces potentially coming back.
No, because that position is going to be brought up here in 5 or 10 minutes by us in terms of what Illinois could look for in the portal. I thought that was very subtle, very, keep it moving after he said that. But I thought it was a really meaningful name for Brett Bielema to bring up, because that's a position that you're really not trying to lose a lot of bodies there right now. There's quite the gap between productive, proven players and young guys who haven't had those opportunities yet. And yes, Joseph Barna. I don't have my sign. I'm going to start saying Joseph.
Because if you even had just Bryant and Joe Barna, and then you got some speed rushers with Daniel Brown and JoJo Hayden, you'd feel a little bit better, right? Kaneno Odeluga could potentially be in that role too. Like you feel a little better about what you'd have if you can lock in. I think Barna can be a solid starter next year, and I think Bryant would be a solid starter. All right, let's dive into our exercise. This is what the people want, right? So this is the exercise I'm setting up. How we would fill out an Illini transfer portal haul. We thought about, do we put dollar values here? But there's danger in that, because while you hear certain numbers, it's just, we don't know the numbers of what these players actually cost, what they're getting. So we could have done that, but I just think people would have taken it a little bit too literally. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to add 10 transfers. I think Illinois is going to add 10 or 12. We're going to add 10 to make it a solid round number. We're allowed 2 marquee additions. So that'd be big spending, right? And potentially star power. 4 starter additions. So this past year, that ends up like a guy like Melvin Priestley, Dennis Briggs Jr., Torrey Cox, and 4 depth additions, guys that just might fill a 2 deep spot. So I think this is a good way of kind of prioritizing how we would allocate our resources in the transfer portal. So how would you go with your marquee 2 additions, Joey? How would you spend your marquee additions in the transfer portal if you are Illinois football?
Would you believe that I actually prepared very minimally for this between my time at Enterprise Rent-A-Car and Brad Underwood Media this morning? Yeah, hey, you got to prepare every now and again. It's a real job, Jeremy. You got to take it seriously.
You're in your 30s, Joey. Look at you.
I know. I get to wake up early now. My number one wide marquee. Whoopsie-doo. My number one marquee additions wide receiver. You've got a great sell. You're going to have Pat Bryant, I think, probably find his way into being a day 2 NFL draft pick. I think he's going to test well. I think between now and that pro day, his life is going to be 40 time. He's going to crush the interview process. We know that. It's all 40 time, which is going to probably keep him into that day 2 range. You can say, hey, Zachary Franklin was the guy who things didn't really go well for him at Ole Miss. There was an injury, he didn't really play. We helped him get back to the form that we saw from him out of UTSA. That's really appealing if you're in the portal, looking for a guy who wants to come in and elevate himself. Justin Stepp is a wonderful sell. He's got Pat Bryant now as someone he can pitch. He's got Zachary Franklin, who's going to end up in a training camp minimally in the NFL. He's got Xavier Legette. You can go down the line. That's appealing. Cortland Sutton. That is appealing for wide receivers looking. So outside of, you just look at the pitch. It's incredible. for Illinois. Like it is a really good pitch. And by the way, the quarterback's pretty good. That's going to get attention of wide receivers in the transfer portal. And then you pair that with the need. The need is significant because you got one more year of Luke Altmaier, and you want to put him in the best possible position for success to lead your team to another 8-win season, 9-win season, bowl season, however you want to look at it, whatever bar you want to set there. Wide receivers are really big part of that, and a really, really key kind of hole in terms of proven production versus, talented inexperience. I think those things are going to pair together. That's my number one marquee.
Okay, this wasn't my number, but it was top tier, right? So I got two of these, and wide receiver was one of them. And to some people, that might be a surprise because I just did my top transfer needs. You can see that at IlliniInquirer.com, broke it down in detail. But my number one transfer need was defensive line. I don't have that in my top tier because I feel like they have some bodies. They have some rotation guys. I feel like they can have some starters there. But most of all, I want to make this offense great because I have a great quarterback and I want to make sure he remains great. And I agree with you. Wide receiver, go get a guy who is proven, and you can get one and entice one. And I am high on what Hank Beatty can do next year. I'm high on Colin Dixon. I think he can.
What, Brett Bielema call him a war daddy?
I love that.
What a random compliment.
There's not many more compliments I'd rather have than war daddy if I'm a football player. Malik Ellsey, Ashton Hollins, Alex Kapka-Jones. I think all those guys can be part of the rotation, but I want a no doubt proven number one guy, and I feel like I can get one, and I feel like I want to invest in one. So we agree. Wide receiver number one, is a marquee addition here. Go with the other one, Joey. I'll let you go.
I'm staying on offense, and I'm going with left tackle. There's a reason that edge, quarterback, and left tackle are typically the top three picks in the NFL draft. It is a marquee position, Jeremy, and you saw the value of J.C. Davis coming in. And was it a perfect season from J.C. Davis? No season is perfect. He's an all Big Ten with honorable mention.
Third team by coaches.
Yeah. You didn't have to think about left tackle. No. You gave Luke Altmaier the comfort of knowing that dude over there is going to not get him blindside smoked more times than not. There's going to be a breakdown because there always is at some point during the course of a season. But that position and the comfort that position brings, if you're Brett Bielema, if you're Bart Miller, you're in the portal saying, hey, we got this guy from New Mexico. We helped him take himself to this level, come in to be the next one and block for a pretty darn good quarterback on an offense that we think is going to be really, really good. And you are going to be a part of making that go.
Absolutely. I no notes. I totally agree. Like left tackle, I was so high on J.C. Davis coming into the season, and there's some early games. I'm like, maybe he's more solid than great. I thought he was so good, for the stretch of the season. I thought towards the end of the season was as good a ball as he played. So maybe it was just he went up against Penn State, and who doesn't struggle against Penn State's defensive line. So I thought he was such a marquee addition last year. If you could just give me one more year of J.C. Davis, like that would fill the need right here. But again, they have a good sell. Offensive line with Brett Bielema and Bart Miller. If J.C. Davis, especially if he gets drafted, he should be in the NFL next year. But they got such a line of good offensive linemen that have made it to the NFL. If you're a lower level guy or a guy who hasn't played before, right, and hasn't played a lot, sure, you want to do it. And Illinois has offered already. It's public now that they've offered P.J. Wilkins out of Charlotte, 6'7", 340. He's mostly played guard, hasn't played a lot there. So maybe that's more of a depth addition or a guy that they really project. But Ole Miss, Cincinnati, some others have offered. So clearly very talented. But the guy who hit the portal who makes a ton of sense would be Miles McVay out of Alabama. Like we've been speculating that name between ourselves for a long time because he was behind Caden Proctor and other greats at Alabama, former top 247 prospect, one of the top prospects in the state in the class of 2023. And Illinois has two of his teammates starting on the offensive line from East St. Louis, Melvin Priestley and Brandon Henderson. So I don't know if there's interest yet. I'm working on that, all of that, but he's looks the part. He just hasn't played a lot. So there's a little bit more risk there than a J.C. Davis, who had proven himself, at least at the group of five level, at a good program in New Mexico. So, but Illinois knows him well. I think he was at the spring game. Was it last spring?
There was one where you're like, is that not Miles McVay over
Yeah.
there, and he said he was there
He's
watching
old
his
because
guys.
we've been watching him since like 2019 as a
Yeah.
freshman.
Yeah, and look, here's the thing. I mean, beyond obviously the fits that you lined up, like East St. Louis isn't short on talent at any point in time. And if you can go in there and say, hey, 3 guys are starting on our offensive line, JoJo Hayden is putting himself in position to be a rotation, outside linebacker. We'll take care of your guys here at Illinois like that. I don't say you don't have to take Miles McVay just to curry favors in East St. Louis. But it's
More important to protect Luke Altmaier, right?
Yeah, that is point A, B, and C. But point D is, hey, that's a pretty good cherry on top to be able to say we're taking care of your guys here at Illinois, and I know darn well you're going to have a number of more guys in the immediate future.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the PFF. I've not watched Miles McVay since he was a high school prospect, but he played 94 snaps this past year, most of them at left tackle. He played some right tackle against Western Kentucky. Played pretty good against LSU in 10 snaps. Played a lot against Mercer, so obviously got a lot of playing time as a second string guy there. 38 snaps, but 69.6 pass block grade, 45.5 run block grade. It's just he's unproven, but the pedigree is clearly there, and there's obviously a lot of familiarity. Illinois offered him, they recruited him, and Brett Bielema's staff was the ones recruiting them, so they know this really, really well, and it makes sense with a lot of East St. Louis. But we'll see. But someone of that pedigree, I think Illinois can get, right? Like someone of that, and if you invest the money that we're talking about top tier, you can get somebody that's going to be like, oh wow, that's a good addition.
And I will also say, just in talking around, my understanding, at least defensively, is production is going to win all in terms of what Illinois is looking for in the portal. Is that G5 production? Is that, where does that production come from? I don't know that they're getting lost in that entirely, but it's also not the end all be all either. And if you have a guy who, you believed in as a prospect back when and enough to offer him and push for him, probably would imagine you still believe in them now. So I do think the more production that a player has, the higher interest. I don't think they're looking for former 4-stars who are, trying desperately to reignite, but I also don't think they're going to be beholden to, well, he only played 94 snaps. So, nope, we're good here. I think you kind of got to understand maybe previous relationships are going to matter in that regard as well.
All right. So now we can add 4 starting pieces. I'll start here, Joey. I mentioned defensive line is the biggest need probably on this roster, given that you just lost 2 starters. So I invest 2 defensive lineman spots in this one. I think Alex Bray can really step up and be a better player next year and grow as he's in his 3rd season. For me, it's all about strength with him. I don't question his talent. I don't question his grit and physicality. It's just that he just needs to add more strength. So I think that'll come this year. Pat Farrell, I think, is a guy you can count on to be in the rotation. Nose tackle will be interesting because you got General Hunt, Jeremiah Warren, Eddie Turk coming back, Isaiah White coming in. I could see them adding maybe a starter there if they want to, but is it necessary? I don't know. But for me, it's more about those 4-eye techniques. And you got to go find another Dennis Briggs at least. And I would like another guy who can at least push Alex Bray and Pat Farrell for a starting job. So I don't think this is where you got to go spend a bunch of money and try and get your next Johnny Newton. But I do want to try and go find my next Dennis Briggs and another piece who I can play in the rotation next year. Because I'd feel pretty good with a rotation of 2 transfers, General Hunt, Alex Bray, Jeremiah Warren, Pat Farrell. Then you got Angel McCollum, Eddie Turk competing for playing time. Like I think McCollum's going to play next year. I feel pretty good about that, especially with Terrence Jameson as my defensive line coach.
Yeah, then I think you and I expect Demetrius John to slide back into that defensive line room from just kind of a necessary body position over at outside linebacker. I'm with you. I have 2 defensive linemen down. I don't have nose tackle as one of my 2 because they've got enough, I think, humans there, and I believe that Terrence Jameson can develop the heck out of that position. And Jeremiah Warren is my circle him, star him. He's the guy who I expect to really probably have people pushing him if they don't add someone for that starting nose tackle job.
Yeah, I would think he'd be the favorite for the starting nose tackle job, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. So 4-eye technique, another Dennis Briggs. In terms of the only thing I would add to what you said is maybe this is one of those situations where you go get a Dennis Briggs in the winter, a replacement for him. And then you get through spring and see if you really truly need another defensive lineman to go in that spring portal cycle. Now, that's not without risk, because that is, as we've talked about a number of times, Illinois did well in that spring portal cycle last year, but it's competitive as heck, and you want someone there presumably for your spring practices and your winter workouts. So maybe they just go and get two off the cuff, but if they only get one, I think you'd look and say, okay, maybe they would revisit that position after spring practice.
Yeah, my thought would probably be like nose tackle. I might go revisit after spring. I still think you need two defensive linemen in the winter here. And I think the makeup for me would probably be one Power 5 guy who wants a little bit more playing time, like Dennis Briggs. And then probably a group of 5 guy or an FCS guy who wants to come up and see if he can make an impact. I think that would make a lot of sense for Illinois. All right, I'll give you the last two. From this starter, we got 4 of them. We filled out 2 defensive linemen. So out of your starter additions with 2 more left, who would you add?
I have outside linebacker as one of those because, as we've talked about, there's still the Gabe Akis elephant in the room of what is he going to do? If he goes to the NFL, then that might move up to my marquee, or you push a little higher up on this list. Or if we talked about Alec Bryant. Goodness gracious, Jeremy. We talked about Alec Bryant and walking through senior day. It sounds like Brett Bielema was optimistic about him, but if that were to pivot, then you really, really need to go get that. I think your sell's good. I think similar to some other positions we've talked about, if Gabe Akis goes pro after 3 years, that's going to get some attention. People want to do that, to be a part of that, kind of that next wave. Seth Coleman had some consistency. That was really the knock on him for the better part of his career, was his consistency. But when he was on, he was pretty good, and he put up good numbers. So I think outside linebacker has to be one of those starter positions, just given you've lost Seth Coleman and you want someone to at least push Alec Bryant and maybe even take that spot if someone's good enough to do that. That's good news for Illinois.
So let me ask you this. If they feel Akis is returning and Bryant is returning, you have Joe Barna, Daniel Brown, JoJo Hayden. Do you even need to add one?
Yeah, but you probably could put that in the depth.
Yes.
Because I think there's a gap there, right? There's a gap of age of when you lose a Trey Smith, when you lose I'm drawing a blank on Josiah Knight. There's an age gap there. So it went from a position we liked in the short, intermediate, and long to now that intermediate can kind of get a little bit hairy. So yeah, I think you would add at least a depth. So I don't know, maybe I have outside linebacker too high. I had to hear, because until I hear Steve Akis say see y'all at Memorial Stadium next year, that's got to be there.
That's right. That's who I had outside linebacker as my last one in here. And I agree for everything you said. If Gabe does come back, I would move this to the depth spot, and I would go more for a long-term guy who's long and twitchy, right? More like Seth. Like I like that JoJo brought. I like Daniel Brown, the idea of him and what he can bring, and get to see a couple snaps of him. I think those guys can make an impact, but you just like a longer option that has that kind of twitch. So that'd be probably more like can you find a Trey Smith in the portal who's willing to develop for a year, maybe play in the rotation for a year, and then be a starter down the line. All right.
I think we have one more. Right?
Yeah, that's where I'm going here. Here, you want to go?
No, go for it. I think we have the same thing.
Yeah, if we have the same top 6 here. I went tight end.
Yeah.
On paper, people might not think it because Cole Rusk is coming back, but Cole Rusk is coming back after a torn ACL. And they need a pass catcher in this group. I love what Tanner Arkin brings as a blocker. Again, I'll say it again for people that haven't heard me before. I thought he was the 3rd best blocker, or one of the top 3 blockers on this team, along with JC Davis and Josh Kreutz. And Geske had some good moments, especially late in the season. But I just thought so consistent on that edge. What they did in the run game, which kind of went underappreciated, how good they were as a running team, much better than they were a year ago. I thought Tanner Arkin was big in that. He's just kind of a dump-off guy, right? Like in the passing game. Henry Boyer's big physical guy, didn't really add much in the passing game this year. And they lose a guy who really contributed, and Carson Goda played a lot of snaps for them. Didn't have a ton of catches, but he was just different. He was a little bit more athletic and get in the open field, and at least was a threat there. So I think they got to add one more piece to the tight end room. And again, I think they have a sell, given what Tip did, given what Tanner's doing. And I just don't think you can go completely all in on Cole Rusk, even though I love the idea of him. He's coming back from major knee surgery. So I think they need a third guy to throw in that rotation because I think Tanner and Henry are kind of similar in what they bring. I think you'd like to bring someone similar to what Cole brings.
Yeah, and Cole Russ told me it's a big 3 in his knee, or the trifecta, I think. So it wasn't just an ACL. He's got a long rehab for him. The good news for him is, as good as news can be, I suppose, it was back in August. So you've had, you've got a few months jump start on this rather than this being an October injury. But losing Carson Goat is a sneaky kind of big deal, right? Because who else is ready? Those scholarship guys, I know you're going to tell me Jake Furtney is a walk-on. I understand that. Who else is ready to step up into that role? And that's what we kind of, similar to some of those intermediate gaps, I think there's a spot that, tight end is in that conversation as well. I like who they have long-term. I like some of the younger guys. I think there's a lot of intrigue there. That's a position that requires time in terms of development. So you kind of need a now type guy. And as you mentioned with Cole Russ coming off that injury, and I think you would probably focus on another pass catcher, another guy who's dynamic in the passing game. Let Tanner Arkin be that blocker. Let him be the one who's going to really open up holes in the running game, catch some of those 4 or 5 yard passes, move the sticks. And now you don't want to have a totally incapable blocker at tight end at any position, right? But I think I want someone who can complement Cole Rusk and who can match Cole Rusk rather and stretch the field a little bit and be another option for Luke Altmaier and another weapon to help maximize this offense.
And I think that's what we're talking about, is just maximizing Luke Altmaier. And when you lose your top 2 receivers, right, you got to find that out in the aggregate, right? You're not going to find one Pat Bryant probably, and even in the wide receiver we're talking about. Like the wide receiver we're talking about is probably more like Sakari, right? Like, and that's a really, really good player, but you need everyone else to kind of step up. And to be honest with you, if you have, Cole Rusk, they were really high on going into this year. Think about how that helps Tanner get more open in the passing game. If you got a guy that maybe you got a bracket and then Tanner's wide open in the flat or something like that, and you get an easy first down. So I think all of it works together, and they just Barry Lundy loves 12 personnel, and the way they like to run the ball, 12 personnel is really big for what they do. So I think other people might have a higher one on this, but I think you can really make this a position of strength if you add another pass catcher around Tanner Arkin and Cole Rusk.
Is this it's 2025, the tight end manifesting itself season under Brett Bielema and Barry Lundy like we had thought was going to be happening? And I say that, and I know Tim Ryman was drafted in the 3rd round, and Tanner Arkin's really, really well thought of, and I thought had a pretty good season. But when we think about, I guess maybe the pass catching tight end manifesting itself and someone who can stretch the field. And, if you go get that in the portal and pair that with Tanner Arkin, with Cole Rusk, I think that's interesting.
All right, depth. We'll go back and forth here. I have one offensive lineman is one of my top ones because my O-line 2 deep right now that I think about it. You got transfer, Josh Geske, Josh Kreutz, Brandon Henderson, Melvin Priestley. And then you got a pretty inexperienced group in your 2 deep, right? I mean, Brandon Hansen didn't redshirt, played late in the season. TJ McMillan, I feel good about as your backup center. And then who are we talking about? Desmond Schuster? Mountis Moeller, Zafir Stewart, Kelvin Francis. Like, I think you need another piece on the interior, and that's why this Wilkins one makes sense, because I think that guy could be your 6th offensive lineman, compete for a starting job, maybe give you some flexibility at positions, but especially on that interior guard, I think you need another option there. And maybe it's a guy who can play guard and tackle, because if, hey, you want to move Melvin Priestley inside, maybe this should be better than a depth piece, but I think you at least need a depth piece on the offensive line.
Well, as you say all of this, maybe it should be, and it really heightens the fact that I did not have it at all, and now I'm asking myself why I did not have it at all. So we did not plan to just say the same thing back to each other, but all the points you made are exactly right. We talked about going and getting a left tackle in the portal, but you kind of do have, same way the defensive line, outside linebacker. The only player still in that offensive line room from that 2022 class is Mountis Moeller. Clayton Leonard's at tight end. Everyone else has transferred out. You go back a year before that, all you've got left from that is Josh Geske, Josh Kreutz, 2 starters. You go back to the 2020 class, I don't think there's a 2020 offensive lineman who remains on this roster. So you're talking 3 recruiting classes and 3 guys still in the room. So there's a gap there, and you got to fill that gap somehow, and you probably don't ideally want to do that with inexperienced guys being in the 2 deep or a snap away when maybe they're not ready to be that. So yeah, I can see them being interested in going and adding a reserve, a Jack Badovanak type of guy who can come in and be a backup at a couple positions.
Yeah, I think they want size still, right? And some flexibility would be good. Because say if you had an injury to a guard, you could move Priestley inside and maybe have a tackle. So it'd be interesting to see how they go that. But I do think they'll add 2 offensive linemen. All right, go ahead. What's one of your first depth pieces?
Well, one of them I don't think we have the answer for right now, but I think quarterback could be in this conversation, depending on what Donovan Leary does. We've talked about this on the last pod. This isn't new. And what was that?
How dare you?
I know. First of all, how dare you? We'll see. Look, Donovan Leary's not in the transfer portal, but we talked about why it's someone to monitor here going. And if he goes, and this is you probably need a John Paddock type. So I don't want to belabor the point, Jeremy, that we talked about last week, but you know how college football goes. You have to be cognizant of the possibilities of a guy with 2 years of eligibility at quarterback. Does he want a chance to go be a starter somewhere? And he's probably earned that chance. The way that he's carried himself, and I'm sure he's got the tape, and Brett Bielema and Barry Lunny, I would have to imagine, would put in every good reference if that were the path that he goes. So probably jumping the gun a little bit, putting quarterback on here, but I think depending on how the next month plays out, that could be a position that's on the list.
Listen, we have to bring it up because it's reasonable. If he decided to do that, and it'd be a loss for Illinois because they are very confident in him as a backup quarterback, but he's a backup quarterback with Luke Altmaier here, and barring Luke Altmaier injury, and we should probably mention this, Luke's pretty durable. He's missed 1 game due to injury. You got benched because John Paddock went on a heater. He's only missed 1 game due to injury, but you got to have another guy. Paddock showed how valuable that is. Even Art Sikowski, even if it was game managing, having somebody with experience would be really important. So I know they love Trey Petty and Carson Boyd, and we'll see what Jershawn Newton adds to that position. Cal Swanson transferring out, it's not a surprise. But again, a big gap in between there, right? So that's why Donovan Leary has been really valuable the last couple of years for them. I'll go corner. I don't feel like it's a huge need for them, but it could be if Xavier Scott decides to make the leap to the NFL, and it could be if there's attrition. Chase Canada is the first guy to leave. Like, will there be another guy, right? Like Terrence Brooks barely played this year. Like, does he decide to go elsewhere? Then all of a sudden, maybe you do need another guy because you got Caleb Patterson, you got Jaheim Clark, you got Torrey Cox. Tyson Rooks was like the second team nickel this past year. Tyler Strain was hurt for a lot of the year, but didn't play a lot. Then you got 5 freshmen, 2 redshirt freshmen, and 3 guys you just signed. And again, that's a position you can sell pretty easily. So maybe you can just find a really talented player there who wants to be developed by Corey Parker and Aaron Henry. So I have corner on this list just because I feel like attrition could happen.
Yeah, I have the corner on my list for all the exact same reasons that you have. And I think that's the position that you could go find another Torrey Cox, a guy who wants to come up after a couple years at maybe a group of 5 school and get a chance. And if you're Corey Parker, if you're Aaron Henry, you're saying, hey, no one thought Torrey Cox was going to get as many reps as he did outside of the building as he ended up getting. Like, well, if you're good enough, we'll put you in there and we'll give you those moments. Ask Jaheim Clark what it's like to get an uptick in snaps late in the season. So kind of depending with these depth, as we now talk through this, Jeremy, these depth positions are, some of it is just maybe covering our bases for what could happen here over the course of the last month. But I had corner on my list, and I added, this is probably why I didn't have offensive line today, Jeremy. I added punter to my list because Declan Dooley announced he's going to the portal. Hugh Robertson, he is 32, 33 years old. He walked on senior day. When that happens, that's just kind of
he's engaged.
Yeah, he's engaged to be married. So that's one of those, like, could be something, could be nothing types of things. But we have to look at it as the fact that it could be something going through that, especially when you kind of fill in the gaps around Hugh Robertson's story and what that means. But right now I would say Fabrizio Pinton would go into spring being the starting punter regardless of what Hugh Robertson does, and let that play out. But I think, depth there. That's probably more of a walk-on spot, or I guess however you phrase whatever roster spot now. Yeah,
it'd be partial scholarship nowadays.
Yeah, I think you got to put that on the list.
the last one I had, which I would have had as a starter edition a couple of weeks ago, I have linebacker on here just to cover my ass, Joey, because I feel pretty decent about linebacker now because you're only going to play 2 at the most at a time. And really, they play 1 a lot. So Dylan Rosiak is coming back. He's coming back from a serious injury. But James Cruz played good ball late in the season. Malachi Hood was a revelation kind of late in the season with the big plays. And then you've added your JUCO kid, Ishmael Conte. And then you've added 4-star Grant Bierman. I think Bierman's probably second-year impact guy. But you added Conte, who has similarities athletically to Malachi Hood. So I think this is probably – I'm fine with this going into the spring ball. And then see if those guys are all good. And if those guys are all good, maybe you don't got to address it. But maybe if you feel like you need some more experience there, maybe Conte's not quite ready or isn't quite as good as you hoped right away, maybe needs a year of development, then maybe you go get a veteran that comes open in the spring. But I just wanted to mention linebacker. I don't know if they actually need one right now. I feel like it might be more of a spring thing because I just feel better about this position after the last several weeks.
100%. I had linebacker. I would echo all the things that you just said about linebacker, including the timeline in which you would really try to identify, because I think what Malachi Hood showed over the end of the season, what James Cruz showed over the end of the season, earned them the right to in spring to show that wasn't just a flash in the pan, that the light bulb is on. And the way that we talked about Aiden Lawfrey last year when they said, hey, the light bulb was on in the spring, they've earned the opportunity to show that light bulb is in fact on and that it'll stay on, and that development, they're kind of ready to come out of that development chamber right now. And I think you also have to factor in coming out of the spring, you might have a better idea of where Dylan Rosiak is in terms of his own recovery from, it looks like he's got a walking boot on. So somewhere in that area, I don't want to say foot, I don't want to say ankle because it's not been specified to us, and speculating on that is reckless. Not everyone wants to do that. So I think you have to factor in Conte as well, Jeremy, right? Like, is he ready? Is he a JUCO player who's ready, or is he a JUCO player who takes time? I just think you want to let that play out as much as you possibly can in the spring and see where you're at out of that.
I think right now, because I made my list before Dooley entered the portal, I think I might put punter over linebacker in the winter, right?
Yeah. Now, but now that plays, we got to see what Hugh Robertson does, right? And that plays, because if Hugh Robertson comes back, punter probably falls off my list. I mean, what Fabrizio Pinton's injury against Northwestern is like the 2% of the time injury. That just doesn't really happen. So if you've got 2, I think that could also drop off the list as well.
All right, the positions we did not mention. Running back, I mean, you get McCray, Lawfrey, Fagan, Valentine all back, and you just added 2 prep prospects they're excited about that give you quickness in Weich and Forster. That would be a real shock. We didn't mention kicker, David Alano. It'll be interesting to see what Ethan Machowski does if he's got opportunities elsewhere. I think he's earned that. And safety. But when you get Miles Scott, Matt Krasetich, Matthew Bailey, Sabor Kareem, Tanner Heckel, you just added Lovett and Stroughton. I feel pretty good about that position going into next year.
Is safety the best? Is safety how we talked about outside linebacker 2 years ago?
I mentioned in the last, I think, our signing day podcast, I feel like they evaluate that position as well as any. But yeah, it's just because you have, Matthew Bailey, all Big Ten guy, Miles Scott, solid starter, 30-year starter. Rasetich looks like he can be a starter. Tanner Heckel looks like a future starter. Sabor Kareem, former 4-star that just is behind Matthew Bailey. Like, I feel really good about that position. Now, of course, attrition can always happen, but yeah, I feel good about what they have there for the time being.
Yeah, I'm with you. I just feel like that position to me has evolved to, I feel good about the now, the intermediate, and the long term of that position. That's how I felt about outside linebacker. It's probably how I felt about running back in 2022 as well. I just feel like they're really well set up at the safety spot. And, especially that free safety, they can just kind of make a player out of anyone at free safety and help those guys really play the best ball at that position that we've seen. So yeah, safety's really, really good about where they are with that.
I don't want to go too deep into this. I wrote about it this morning. I just want to mention it. That the whole interesting thing about this to me is revenue sharing is starting next season, right? And it should give Illinois more ammo. It sounds like they're going to have more ammo when it comes to just finances when they go to the portal, whether it's NIL or whether it's the revenue sharing deals that they're going to do. That all starts in July. But the impact is, I just thought the biggest takeaway is Brett Bielema, Josh Whitman, and even talking with Pat Embleton, the GM on this podcast, like they all seem to think it's going to help Illinois. And I just find that notable that Whitman, who is part of all these discussions of how this is going to work, and I get the skepticism around everything, but they all think this is going to help close the gap. Maybe it doesn't level the playing field completely, but that this will help close the gap for Illinois football to where they feel like they got the coach who can develop them, who can coach them up and give them stability and lead them to success. But now if you can like close the gap of what it takes to actually get the best talent, that maybe it helps Illinois further what they're doing right now under Brett Bielema.
Yeah, I've got a lot of skepticism for what a new model will be, how it'll look. I guess that's one of those things that I don't know. We'll have an answer on that, Jeremy, for a while, but it is a lingering thing in this class. And Brett Bielema and the people at Illinois seem to be pretty optimistic that this is not going to hurt Illinois, that it'll help them play closer and bring down that, try to find themselves more in the mix with some of those guys. It's clear Brett Bielema believes in this coaching staff. And he said, hey, what did he say on signing day? There's $20 million rosters. We've got about 25% of that, was, I believe, what he said. And we're knocking on the door. I'm glad on Sunday he did clarify that he did not think they were actually a college football playoff team, and he was having more fun on Twitter than not. But they seem really encouraged about what the possibility can be. I need to see it. I need to hear smarter people than me talk about the pros and cons, what could work, what would be a concern to work. That's all feels like June stuff to me, right? Like, I don't know how much we're going to know about that between now and then.
I mean, the idea is that revenue sharing, which is up to $20.5 million for each school. I'm really just trying to do the elementary for people. Most of that's going to go to football, right? Like that is the money maker. Basketball is going to get a big chunk of it. From everything we hear now, it sounds like Title IX will not apply to this. So like 90% is going to go to football and basketball. And I would imagine for most schools, 70% of that is going to go to football. Most of that will go to the top of the roster, right? The 2 deep. Most of it's going to go towards the 2 deep. But then NIL, what happens with that? And that's where the skepticism for me lies, because I think the revenue sharing is pretty cut and dry. It's a contract with the players and all of that. Whether it's multi-year deals, that'll be interesting, stuff like that. So some of those details I'm really interested to see. But the idea behind NIL is they will have a new enforcement. And whenever we bring that up, we think of the NCAA and their terrible enforcement. But there will be a new enforcement mechanism. From what I understand, it's a third party, which is a corporation, which has some credibility from what I understand, and that they will determine whether it's a fair market deal or not in NIL. So if Caitlin Clark gets $2 million from Gatorade, that's a fair market deal. She's going to make all that money, and it doesn't count towards the revenue share for an Iowa, right? But if it's not, if it's like some local company says, well, we're giving $100,000 for 2 appearances, they're going to say, no, that's only worth $20,000 and you have to pay the rest through revenue sharing. That's how I understand of how it's going to work. This is all run by the Power 4 conferences. So it's not the NCAA that would be doing this. All of them agreed to this House settlement, and this would be part of that. I understand some skepticism about how that's going to be monitored, how it's going to be enforced, but that is the idea behind it. The devil is in the details. We don't have the details yet.
Yeah, I guess my issue, I agree, and that's my understanding as well. My issue is, who are you to tell me what? I mean, if 2 appearances at a car dealership are worth $100,000 to me and to my business, why would you tell me it's not worth that?
Is that part of the contract they will sign? Right, that you have to agree to this, like that your NIL, if you sign a revenue sharing, all of that, I'm interested to know. I don't know the details. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not.
Sure. I just wonder, like now businesses are businesses and they're not interested in probably paying more out than they have to pay out. And I think maybe the hope is that'll all come to earth. But I find like if you had your kid's birthday party and your kid was the biggest fan in the world of X player, maybe that player realistically showing up is worth $10,000, but to you it's worth $100,000, right? Yeah. Like who are you to tell me that it's not worth this money that I'm willing to fork out? That's where I would just wonder how that all gets phrased. I don't know.
That's where the corporation has to have a lot of credibility with all of that, right? Whoever's doing this, and the players have to agree. And that's what's interesting is there's no collective bargaining. And now we're going down the rabbit hole of all of this. But yeah, all those questions I think are fair. All the skepticism I think is fair, but that's the idea behind it. So I know people are like, well, if it's $20 million, Alabama's just going to have $20 million, or Ohio State's just going to have $20 million of NIL to add on top of it. I get it. But yeah,
for this to work, there has to be an understanding, right? There has to be
an agreement.
Right.
And the SEC and Big Ten are big parts of this. This is not the NCAA telling the Big Ten and SEC what to do. This is the Big Ten and SEC charting their own course. And Whitman has talked about this. We have to chart our own course so the courts don't chart our course moving forward.
Yeah, and that's, again, any skepticism if someone's like, boy, that doesn't sound right to me. I get it. Kind of with you, right? Like I don't know. So I just need to hear smart people talk about this. And I say that, like, Josh Whitman has talked a lot about this, but smart people talk about this when there's more of a framework in place and there's more that you can confidently say rather than, well, this is kind of what's in the chamber here and maybe this or that. Like, I want a little bit more in place and then let the smart people tell me what it is.
Last thing I want to leave people with is been a long podcast, but I think it's been a great one to kind of set the table for the offseason. I asked Brett Bielema about staff retention, and he said starts with the coordinators, and he wants them all back. That's not a surprise, right? I mean, Aaron Henry improved a lot this year. Barry Lundy's been a huge strength of this program. And Robbie Disher, I mean, the special teams were a huge advantage this past year. And, you know, it sounds like Whitman is going to arm him with what he needs to make sure that's a possibility. I do think Lundy's going to be a head coaching candidate at some point, whether it's this offseason or next offseason. I think he's done enough to do that. And obviously he's got good pedigree. So that'll be the interesting one moving forward. But I mean, whatever they want to pay Barry, like, he's deserving of an extension. Like, what he's done here in 3 years is pretty amazing for a program that was so bad, putrid offensively for so long, that he's deserving of, you know, the kind of stuff that Ryan Walters was getting at the end of his tenure. And I think Josh Whitman will do it. You don't get this far, Joey, and then get cheap. And I don't expect Josh Whitman to do that.
No, Barry Lundy's such an interesting topic for a head coaching job because Illinois pays him handsomely. And I expect that salary to go up to keep him around. So you don't have to just jump at the first place that'll take you. So you'll really, you know, what teams are pursuing him, what makes sense for him. That it's so fascinating because financially you can be a coordinator until that exact right opportunity comes around. Ryan Walters could have stayed at Illinois until that perfect. If Purdue didn't come that year, he could have waited it out. Yeah. And he could have been paid really, really well to do so. So, you know, it's kind of what is this? The person want? Did they want to say, hey, whatever, I want to go be a head coach. Money isn't it. I want to go get my start on this and I'll work back up from here if it's a G5 job? Or do you want to just wait out for that Power 5 job? It's not, Barry Lundy's not alone in that. There's a lot of coordinators who, because salaries have gotten to where they are, can afford to pick and choose and take the exact right one for them.
Yeah, and like, I'm not afraid to speculate stuff like this. Like, he's an Arkansas grad. He's an Arkansas quarterback. I'm sure at some point he would like to coach Arkansas. Right?
He nearly did.
Right. Well, he was an interim head coach.
Right. So. But I mean, I thought there's, you know, my understanding, they kind of liked him. Yeah. Like, he was there in that spot. So we'll see, man. He's
maybe he waits a year. Right. Illinois has a great offensive year and Arkansas comes up because he's on the hot seat again next year, like Sam Pittman. Maybe he just waits for that one. I'm sure, like, I don't know what jobs are open, but a Sun Belt job, he's more than qualified for, right? Like, if he wants to be a head coach there, but maybe it pays off to be patient given the money he's going to make. He'll be a 7-figure coordinator, I would imagine, next year. And the security he's got with a head coach he loves in Brett Bielema.
Yeah, and I think to your point, you know, you don't come this far to get cheap. I think if you're administration and all, you got to make it really darn hard for him to leave. And you make sure he's leaving for the right job that, you know, like Ryan Walters, where it's like, man, I can't really blame you.
Yeah, listen, it didn't end up being the perfect job for him. But it was a Big Ten job. Like, he's not going to say no to a Big Ten job.
No, and you've got to make sure your compensation lets you know how much you believe in them, so they don't have to just leave to go be a coach somewhere that maybe they're kind of like, well, you know, whatever. Make it hard for them to leave. And I think Josh Whitman's shown that he's going to make sure Illinois is in the competitive space to make those conversations and make that something to think about.
The nightmare scenario for me with like a coordinator isn't that like you take a G5 job, like if Barry got like Arkansas State or something like that, right? Like that's fine. Like if he wants to take that chance, but it'd be losing him to like an SEC program as the offense.
Right.
That's what you don't want. And
you want to make it so he doesn't go anywhere that isn't a head coach.
Yes.
Regardless, right? Or, that's what it comes down to. And I think Josh Whitman's proved that he's willing to put that situation out there where you're going to make it really hard to leave unless it's the next step of your career as a head coach.
All right, I think we covered it all. Illinois going bowling. We covered the transfer portal, and now we covered this offseason in total for Illinois. We appreciate everyone watching.
We were live. You want to go through the comment? I mean,
yeah,
we were live. People were.
I was trying to get you out of here, Joey, so you can start right.
I guess there was basketball availability today. St. Dom's got thoughts again.
Yeah, hold on. What do we want to hit on here? That's not a ton that I need to get to here.
No, there was one with the passing of Coach Dana Dimmel. Do we expect Illinois to add another in its place? Yeah, I do. I mean, clearly there's resources to build on to that coaching staff and go from there. Dana Dimmel had a lot of value. Brett Bielema was really, really complimentary of what he brought to Illinois this year and really emotional on signing day. And talking about Dana Dimmel is really a heartbreaking deal for him. But Brett Bielema's got two things going for him in terms of some of these position, position coaches, the 10 on-field guys, as we typically thought about it over the course of covering college football. One, it's clear that there's going to be resources pumped into making sure Brett Bielema has what he needs. And two, he's got an umbrella where people want to be under, right? People want to come, whether it's a young person like a Dele Harding, like an Art Sikowski, who want to get that jump with Illinois. Grant Morgan's a really good call there as well. Or Kevin Richardson came back. Or whether it's someone who's been around the field for a while and wants to come and maybe not have that, responsibility is not the right word, but not be that full-time running backs coach, wide receivers coach. They want to be more of a behind-the-scenes person. Brett Bielema knows a lot of people. His coaches know a lot of people. So you're not talking about a small pool of what you're going to pull for that.
St. Tom did ask, will Kevin Kane come back to Illinois? Is that bridge burned? I don't think that bridge is burned. Kevin,
I don't think it's burned, but I don't know that there's a need right now in terms of, you've got Clint Sinham there. I think Kevin Kane has done enough in his coaching career that he can go be one of those 10, as we think of it, those 10 position coaches or whatever the case is.
He was good here at Illinois. He's a really good recruiter. So for a Midwest program, he can recruit Chicago. He can recruit Kansas City. So whether it's a G5 coordinator job or a Power 5 outside linebackers coach, I think he should be in demand. But yeah, Illinois doesn't have a need there. And I don't listen. There were some things in recruiting that got heated with Illinois and Purdue, but I still think there's a lot of respect there. Brett Bielema did say yesterday, Purdue keeps hiring my buddies. I'm sure there was at least a message to Ryan Walters, right? I don't know that for sure, but I'm sure there was a message there.
Yeah.
All right, Jive.
That was one I wanted to bring up as well.
Was it kind of telling that Leary got very little mop-up action this year? When? Right. When was there mop-up action? Outside of Eastern Illinois, when he played, Illinois was just in a bunch of close games where you really couldn't afford to take Luke Altmaier off the field.
No, and he followed up in the comments with Michigan State and Northwestern. Here's the thing.
Michigan State was close.
That's right. And Northwestern, they had that late drive at the end. Imagine the fire Brett Bielema would catch if he pulled Luke Altmaier early in the fourth without a lead big enough, and all of a sudden Northwestern comes back and puts you in really significant danger of a 9th win if Donovan Leary is not, it's not Luke Altmaier. I think it's fair to say he's not Luke Altmaier. You're catching a lot of hell for something that you didn't have to do. Like when you mop up roles are few and far between when you play with the margins that Brett Bielema. You better be darn sure that you are in that mop-up situation or things can snowball. And Brett Bielema, I think, prepares for everything. And you're certainly preparing that you got to make darn well sure that you got a big enough lead to do that, or things are going to you're going to get a lot of questions that you don't want.
Who's the band that's saying "Make Damn Sure"? So Taking Back Sunday. That's what I kept thinking of when he said "darn sure." Crows asks, did y'all ever think you get to cover Illinois go big game hunting and recruiting? Obviously, the portal wasn't like this in the past, but I imagine this kind of whiplash for y'all. Yeah, it's the difference of winning and having money to go recruit with. Like Lovey went some big game hunting and recruiting and got Beeson and got Isaiah Williams and some guys like that. But yeah, I do think Illinois is now capable of doing that because of winning, because they now have some portal. But there's a decision. You still got to moneyball some of this stuff, right, Joey? You still have a budget, and how much of that do I want to put towards retention and Luke Altmaier and Gabe Ackes and Xavier Scott and all of that? But also, if I can get 2 starters or 1 marquee guy, what do I want? And I still think Illinois is at a program, especially with the returners they have, they'll probably they can get for sure starters. I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think that Illinois certainly come a long way in terms of the money available to them. Brett Bielema probably has said that as enough, or kind of in different ways, but they're still not Scrooge McDuck, right? Like you've still got to be intentional about how that money goes and how it's used, and you're not printing money out of the Smith Center. That being said, you still have the money to go get in some of those conversations and to be a part of that and to really pitch what you've got going, pair that with the financial component, and really see if you can make something work. So, I mean, yeah, you assume if you're going to be in the Big Ten that that the program you cover is going to be in a position to go big game hunting at some point, right? I mean, otherwise you probably things are going to bad. You're covering like a 3 or 4 win season. So at some point you think the natural evolution of things is going to lead Illinois to that point. But I think it's fair to say like they are in a position where they can go get in some of those conversations. I mean, they're going to win 4 of those throw money around battles. No. And I don't know that they're really looking to do that. I think you're right. Starters, two is greater than 1 in some of those situations, especially at some of those non-marquee quarterback positions.
Sometimes you had a marquee transfer and it doesn't work out. Terrence Brooks, right? Like, and it's nothing at the kid, but it's like they had other guys. Like they went and got another guy that was kind of like a depth addition in Torrey Cox that obviously they thought could start.
What happens if you don't get Torrey Cox? Think about that. Like, think about how different this is right now. If you don't get a Torrey Cox, who we talked about, but he definitely didn't get the full coverage treatment of a Terrence Brooks because of just
from Illinois.
Right, that's right. So like that's the thing. Like, yeah, the big game hunt, but you got to kind of be smart to jive turkey again. What would you do if you were Cal Swanson? I would open up IlliniInquirer.com and see the list of transfer outs that assuming you don't know that Cal transferred.
No, what would you do if you're Cal? So I would go to an FCS school or something like that.
Or think about see if wide receiver is a route for you, because he's super athletic. He's incredibly athletic. So I don't want to minimize his athletic skills. If you want to go play quarterback, FCS is probably your route.
It's gotta be your run first guy. Philip, thank you for the super chat. We'll wrap up with this $30. Thanks for all of the work you guys have done over the course of the season covering this team, and now with the portal pretty much around the clock. Just pitching in for the beverage budget in Orlando. Bojangles, appreciate you.
He says meme guy, like we don't know who he is. He's our celebrity, man.
Yeah. Appreciate you guys. All right. We'll wrap it up there. It's almost an hour and a half into this podcast. We appreciate everybody listening to the Illini Inquirer podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe to us, hit the notifications bell. We appreciate all you guys. If you're listening on the podcast, follow us, rate us, review us, wherever you get your podcast, and stay tuned to the latest for IlliniInquirer.com. We just put our transfer portal tracker up there. I got another offer. They offered James Thompson, a defensive lineman out of Wisconsin. So we'll add some more information on our transfer portal tracker there. Everybody have a great day. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.